Growing up, Sarah was always considered the golden child. While I spent hours assembling computers in the garage, she was busy winning debate tournaments and student council elections. Mom would light up whenever Sarah talked about her leadership goals and her plans to impact the tech world. "Your sister has vision," Dad would say as he watched her present her high school business plan. "She knows what it takes to build something real." Meanwhile, I was treated as the computer kid who spent time with gadgets. When I began freelancing in web development at 16, earning more than many adults, the family brushed it off as pocket money and encouraged me to focus on real subjects, like Sarah's pre-law track. The pattern only grew stronger in college. Sarah went to Harvard Business School, while I chose a state university for computer science. Every family event turned into a highlight reel of Sarah's networking accomplishments. Her internship at Goldman Sachs, her acceptance into selective entrepreneurship programs. "Sarah's building connections that matter," Mom would tell relatives. "She's forming relationships with future CEOs and investors. That's how real business works." If I brought up my software projects or the apps I was building, the conversation quickly shifted back to Sarah's latest academic award or business competition win. I eventually stayed quiet during these discussions, focusing on my work instead of seeking acknowledgement. After graduation, Sarah launched her tech startup with significant attention. The family invested their savings, convinced they were backing a future Silicon Valley success. Local news covered her launch, and LinkedIn was filled with congratulations from extended contacts. "Sarah's company is going to change everything," Dad announced that Christmas. "She has the business skills and the vision." At the same time, I quietly started a software consultancy working with Fortune 500 companies to improve their digital infrastructure. The work was highly technical, very profitable, and largely unseen outside the industry. While Sarah held public events, I worked on complex issues for clients who paid premium rates for confidentiality. My savings grew steadily, but I kept the same used Honda and lived in a modest apartment. The family assumed I was barely getting by as a freelance computer guy. When they asked about my job, I'd mention a programming project and steer the conversation away. Meanwhile, Sarah's startup was burning through funds quickly. The early excitement faded as she faced market competition, gala product challenges, and high customer acquisition costs. Still, the family stayed positive, convinced her Harvard background would eventually lead to success. "Just growing pains," Mom would tell worried relatives. "All startups deal with this stage." 2 years after Sarah launched her company, it was losing money rapidly. The initial funding was nearly gone, and potential investors were pressing her about revenue expectations and market sustainability. She needed a significant capital boost to stay afloat. That's when I stepped in. Using a network of shell companies and investment entities, I became Sarah's largest anonymous investor. The $150 million investment came through a respected venture capital firm that specialized in tech startups. To Sarah and the family, it appeared to be validation from top-tier industry players. I knew Sarah would attract major investors. Dad said proudly when the funding was announced, "This is exactly what we expected." The investment terms were designed to give me substantial control over company decisions while keeping my involvement hidden. Sarah believed she had convinced experienced institutional investors to support her vision. In reality, the person funding her was the younger brother, who was supposedly disconnected from real business. The situation was ironic. Every board meeting, every strategic plan, and every major direction ultimately required my approval. Sarah presented her ideas to investors she believed were assessing her leadership, unaware that the main decision maker was someone she had long dismissed as a casual tech hobbyist. Her funding success elevated her status in the family even further. Each gathering became an opportunity for her to discuss her innovative company and the influential investors supporting her. "My investors include some of the most accomplished people in Silicon Valley," she would tell relatives. "They don't just fund companies, they offer strategic insight built on decades of experience." The family absorbed every word. For them, Sarah represented their belief that formal education, established networks, and traditional business paths were the true markers of achievement. While she gained recognition, my real accomplishments remained unnoticed. My consultancy had expanded into a multi-million-dollar operation with clients across 3 continents. I had created proprietary software that Fortune 100 companies licensed for significant annual fees. My personal net worth had reached levels that would have surprised the entire family. Yet I continued living modestly and maintaining a low profile. When Sarah talked about her company's growth and her investor relationships, I listened politely and asked thoughtful questions. The family interpreted this as curiosity from someone who didn't fully understand business, rather than insight from someone managing the operation behind the scenes. "It's nice that you're interested in Sarah's progress," Mom would say privately. "Maybe you can learn something about real business by watching her work with professional investors." The family gathering that changed everything took place on a rainy Sunday in November. Sarah had been increasingly stressed about the company's performance, though she maintained an optimistic front for the family. Recent quarters had been disappointing, and the board, communicating through my representatives, had raised tough questions about strategic direction. That evening, Sarah was in full presentation mode. She had just returned from a conference where she was recognized as a rising star in tech and featured on a panel about female entrepreneurs. The family was impressed, eager to hear about her growing industry recognition. "The networking opportunities are incredible," Sarah said, gesturing with her wine glass. "At this level, you connect with investors, advisors, and entrepreneurs who know how to build serious companies." She glanced at me with what felt like a mix of pity and condescension. "It's a completely different world from what most people understand about business. You need to think strategically, understand the market, manage investor relationships, and build scalable systems. It's not something you can just figure out by tinkering with computers." Dad nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between real entrepreneurship and hobbies people call businesses." Mom added, "Sarah learned the fundamentals at Harvard. She knows how to work with serious investors who expect professional-level operations." I continued eating quietly, occasionally asking questions about specific aspects of her company's performance. The family interpreted my questions as brotherly curiosity rather than insights from someone who had access to full financial reports and board minutes. Then Sarah made the comment that sealed her position. "The thing about real business," she said, looking directly at me, "is that you can't fake it. You either understand institutional investors and scalable operations, or you're just a pretend entrepreneur with your little online project." Laughter erupted around the table. Even our usually diplomatic aunt joined in, agreeing that Sarah had perfectly distinguished serious business from amateur attempts. "Stop playing pretend entrepreneur," Sarah concluded. "Your little online thing isn't real business." Everyone laughed harder. I nodded quietly and said, "Understood." But inside, I was already drafting the email that would change everything. That Sunday night, I reviewed Sarah's company files. As the controlling investor, I had access to every financial document, board presentation, and strategic plan. The numbers were stark. Despite my $150 million investment, the company was still losing money at an unsustainable rate. Sarah had expanded rapidly without addressing core business model issues. Revenue per customer remained low, acquisition costs were climbing, and competitive pressures were increasing. The company needed another major funding round within 6 months, or it would face severe cash flow problems. More concerning, the board was increasingly uneasy about Sarah's strategic decisions. Key hires had been poor fits, product development timelines were consistently missed, and partnership deals had fallen through due to unrealistic expectations. Patience among the investors, my proxy, was running thin. Monday morning, I sent a carefully worded email to the managing partner at the venture capital firm representing my front for the investment. I wrote, "After reviewing recent performance and strategic concerns raised in the last board meeting, I believe it is time to reconsider our position in this investment. Please initiate the process for a complete withdrawal of our $150 million stake. Transfer all funds to our primary accounts by week's end." The email was professional, businesslike, and devastating. Withdrawing $150 million from a startup would not just destabilize the company, it would likely destroy it. No other investor could replace that level of funding, especially after a lead investor publicly signaled no confidence. Within hours, the firm contacted Sarah to schedule an emergency board meeting. On Tuesday morning, she called me, her usual confidence gone. "Something strange is happening with the investors," she said. "They want to meet tomorrow and are talking about strategic repositioning and capital reallocation. I don't understand." I expressed concern. "Does it relate to the quarterly numbers?" She admitted. "Performance hasn't been perfect, but we're building for long-term growth. Real investors should understand tech companies go through tough phases before scaling." Wednesday's board meeting was severe. The venture capital representatives, acting on my instructions, presented a detailed analysis of the company's challenges. Revenue projections were unrealistic, cost management was poor, execution consistently fell short. "We've been patient," the lead partner said. "Our analysis indicates fundamental problems with the business model and strategy. Additional capital would not be productive at this time." Sarah countered with presentations on market opportunity, competitive advantage, and long-term vision, but the numbers were clear. The company was burning cash without sustainable growth. "We have decided to withdraw our investment," the partner concluded. "Effective immediately, we will liquidate our position and reallocate capital to more promising opportunities." Sarah was stunned. "You can't withdraw $150 million overnight. The company will collapse without it." "We understand the implications," the partner replied, "but our responsibility is to our own investors, and continued support cannot be justified for operations failing to meet expectations." By Thursday, news of the crisis had reached the family. The sophisticated investors had suddenly pulled out, leaving the startup in urgent need of funding. Mom called a family meeting for Friday evening. "We need to figure out how to help Sarah through this difficult period," she said. "Even the best entrepreneurs face setbacks when investors don't understand their vision." The gathering felt tense. Sarah sat at the head of the table, exhausted but determined. She had spent the week reaching out to potential investors to replace the withdrawn funds. "It's just a temporary setback," she insisted. "The investors were spooked by short-term performance issues, but the fundamental business model is sound. I just need investors who understand long-term value creation." Dad nodded. "Sarah built something real. The right investors will recognize that." I listened quietly as the family debated solutions. Uncle Robert suggested using his business connections. Aunt Linda offered to contact her wealthy friends. Mom and Dad discussed liquidating retirement savings to provide bridge funding. The tension was palpable. Sarah's company had become central to the family's identity and financial planning. They had assumed her success was guaranteed, that Harvard training and a professional approach would naturally produce large returns. "What we need," Sarah said, looking around the table, "is someone with real money who understands tech. Someone who can write a $50 million or $100 million check without hesitation." She glanced at me, her expression a mix of frustration and pity. "Unfortunately, this type of investing requires substantial capital and industry expertise. It's not something that can be figured out by tinkering with computers." Initially, I planned to let Sarah's company fail quietly. With the investment withdrawn, she would either have to secure new funding, which would be nearly impossible, or shut down operations. It would have been a clear, professional lesson in business reality. But her ongoing condescension changed my mind. "Actually," I said quietly, "I might be able to help." The room went silent. Everyone looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to polite skepticism. "I know you need sophisticated investors," I continued, "but I've been following your company closely and have some thoughts on what might work." Sarah offered a patronizing smile. "That's kind of you, but this requires people familiar with institutional investing and tech valuations. It's very complex." "I understand," I said. "Let me make a call." I pulled out my phone and dialed my primary investment advisor at Goldman Sachs. "Hi, David," I said. "I need to discuss liquidating some positions to free capital for a direct investment opportunity." The family stared, increasingly bewildered. Sarah looked as if she were witnessing a breakdown. "Yes," I added, "I'm looking at investing directly in a tech startup, around $150 million. Can you outline the structure for a direct equity position?" David's response was clear enough for the table to hear. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. Given your portfolio size, $150 million would be about 8% of your holdings. We can structure this as a straight equity purchase or as convertible preferred shares depending on your strategic goals. I added, also, I want to discuss my existing position in TechFlow Innovations. I understand I am currently the majority stakeholder via Meridian Capital. Correct? That's correct, David confirmed. Your $150 million through Meridian gives you controlling interest. You've been the primary decision maker on all major strategic issues. I looked at Sarah, whose face had gone pale. David, I said, let's schedule a board meeting for Monday. I intend to take a more direct role in management. Silence followed for nearly a minute. Sarah stared at me as if I'd announced something impossible. Mom and Dad appeared stunned, struggling to process the information. Finally, Sarah spoke. That's not possible. I handed her the phone, still connected to David. Would you like to confirm the investment details? Shaking, she took the call. This is Sarah Mitchell from TechFlow Innovations. Can you confirm the positions? David patiently explained. Mr. Johnson has been the primary investor since your funding rounds. The $150 million investment through Meridian Capital maintained anonymity, but has always represented controlling interest. He receives quarterly reports and has final approval over major strategic decisions. Sarah hung up, staring at me in shock, confusion, and dawning horror. You're the investor, she whispered. I'm the investor, I confirmed. You've been operating under my capital and guidance for 2 years. The family processed the revelation slowly. Dad spoke first. So when you were asking questions, you were checking if her understanding matched the reports you were receiving, I explained. Mom shook her head. Your little online project is a software consultancy generating around $40 million per year. The startup investment was funded from my personal savings. Sarah cycled through emotions. Shock, embarrassment, anger, grief. She realized everything she had said about sophisticated investors had been directed at the very person providing them. Why? She asked finally. I considered carefully. Initially, I believed in your vision and wanted to help. The anonymous structure was to prevent family dynamics from interfering with business. Now it's time for honest conversations about business success and respect. The following weeks brought a complete shift in family dynamics. Sarah's company didn't collapse. I restructured it with proper management oversight and realistic growth targets, though Sarah's role shifted from CEO to senior product manager. Experienced executives handled operations and strategy, forcing the family to confront new realities. Years of assumptions about intelligence, competence, and success were overturned. The computer kid they had dismissed as struggling was actually a multimillionaire who had quietly funded the Golden Child startup. Sarah initially struggled with the change. Her achievements had been built on capital provided by the brother she had dismissed. The so-called sophisticated investors she had boasted about were actually representatives of someone she had belittled. Over time, however, she adapted. By combining her Harvard training with humility and guidance from experienced mentors, she became genuinely effective in her new role. Within 6 months, the company became profitable. With proper capital allocation and realistic expectations, the business model she envisioned worked. Her vision had never been flawed. The issue had been execution and an unwillingness to acknowledge knowledge gaps. As for me, I finally shared my own success openly. The family learned about my consultancy, licensed software, investment portfolio, and other ventures I had quietly built. Recognition was gratifying, but the key lesson was clear. Success comes in many forms. Technical expertise and patient capital are as valuable as networking and formal credentials. Harvard connections matter, but problem solving and delivering results matter more. Most importantly, family respect cannot be assumed. It must be earned. Speaking up and challenging assumptions was necessary to redefine understanding of business and achievement. Sarah never again questioned the legitimacy of my work, and I no longer allowed the family to assume that traditional achievements automatically conferred superior insight. Pretending was over for both of us.